presentation, which you can see on that monitor. Right there.
Par le président du Conseil des droits de l'homme national, Dr Ali, une des personnalités les plus en vue du régime qatari. M. Abderrahmane, et c'est peut-être pour cela que son affaire bénéficie aujourd'hui d'une attention, y compris médiatique, ne ressemble pas aux milliers de victimes que le régime qatari a fait ces dernières années, dans un silence étourdissant, dans une incapacité d'incarnation de leur part, parce qu'ils étaient soit des ouvriers du sud-est asiatique, soit des opposants politiques que l'on avait réussi à faire disparaître sans preuve. Monsieur Ben Abderrahmane est un miraculé, et c'est un miracle que nous soyons aujourd'hui en mesure de vous porter sa voix et de vous faire connaître son histoire, celle de sa famille et de ses proches.
Je travaille avec le président de Paris Saint-Germain. Ça fait 20 ans que je travaille avec lui et au Qatar. Et là, ça fait presque 10 ans, 12 ans que je travaille avec lui à Paris. Donc, 10 ans, il n'a pas déclaré. Ça fait 12 ans que je travaille. C'est la première année, ça fait 1 an qu'ils m'ont déclaré ici à Paris. Et j'ai insisté à beaucoup de choses. Donc, je connais beaucoup de bêtises qu'il a fait. Donc là, ils sont en train de menacer pour que je vienne au Qatar parce que ils savent que je connais beaucoup de choses. Donc là, s'il m'arrive quoi que ce soit, c'est lui le responsable, c'est monsieur El Khalifi. Là, il n'arrête pas à me dire viens au Qatar, viens au Qatar, viens au Qatar. Et je ne veux pas y aller. Donc c'est ça.
All right. So we're very fortunate to have Tayeb Ben Abderrahman joining us via Zoom today from France. Tayeb is a French business director specializing in geopolitical and economic consultancy with over 2 decades of experience. During Qatar's 2017 diplomatic crisis, he collaborated with Qatari institutions to build international support for the country. As a senior advisor to Qatar's National Human Rights Committee, he led initiatives on anti-corruption and intelligence gathering. So Tayeb, I'm handing the mic over to you for your remarks. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Hello everyone. I would like to sincerely thank you for being here today to hear my testimony regarding my case, which is marked by several human rights violations. I have been sentenced to death and I am a victim of judicial falsifications of the highest magnitude. I am here to shed light on these injustices I face so that the truth can be heard. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tayeb, for your introductory remarks. Our next speaker today, and we have a very impressive panel of speakers with us. Our next speaker, sitting right here to my left, is Luc Vidal, who's an international human rights lawyer based in Paris, with extensive experience in interstate disputes, investment, arbitration, and international criminal law. As head of the International Litigation and Arbitration Department within a boutique firm, he has advised and represented states, corporations, and individuals before international and European courts and tribunals, including the International Court of Justice. Luc was also a member
Be here today. I've been counsel to Tayeb for the last 3 years, and I think that my remark, at least during this first phase, will mostly be to recount the different, I would say the background, the factual background of what happened to Tayeb since his arrest in Qatar in 2020. So to give you a brief summary of the factual background of this case, Tayeb is, to put it, an international businessman who had been active at different levels, both in France and in an international level for the last decade. When he was approached in 2017 by Qatar, who were seeking at the time, Qatar was facing a very strong blockade from other countries within the Persian region, and they were looking for personalities to raise awareness about the situation of the Qatari population, especially in Europe. And Tayeb was selected to carry the voice of the Qatari population in France and in some African countries. So that's why Qatar started working for Qatari authority, and that's also the reason why in 2019 he became the general advisor to the Qatari National Human Rights Committee. So he basically became the number 3 within that public organization, whose role supposedly is to protect and defend matters of human rights within Qatar. And that's the position he occupied until the end of the year 2019, and it's also the reason why in 2019 he decided to resettle in Qatar, bringing his whole family in Doha and basically settling his life there. Yet in 2020 his life went upside down when he was brutally arrested on the 13th of January. He was arrested by, obviously security forces, but without any information about the charges that explained his arrest, nor even the organization that was behind this measure. He was arrested, his assets were seized, he was then brought into a secret detention center where he was kept during 3 weeks, where he was also tortured, and where threats were raised against himself, his family, in order to recover all the information he had gathered during his professional activities for Qatar. After those 3 first weeks, he was then imprisoned in solitary confinement at the prison of Salvador for another 5 months, where the torture continued, the threat against his life was also maintained for all this period. And it's only after he had agreed to relinquish all his documentary databases to Qatar representatives that he was finally released at the end of June 2020, but released yet banned from traveling outside the country and placed under house arrest in Qatar for another 4 months. The reason for this, this house arrest, as well as the reason for his detention or his arrest, I mean, he was never provided any explanation, save some very general, information about being held under the order of the emir or whatever. But he was never formally charged. He was never formally notified with any information about the reason why he was so arrested and detained for the whole of the detention. And then finally, he was basically expelled at the end of October 2020 and sent back to France. The story could end here, and so would my initial intervention, but the fact is that after recovering from very severe PTSD in France, Tayeb started to seek redress and justice. He first did so through, I would say, local remedies, trying to contact the National Human Rights Committee of Qatar, trying to reach the public prosecutor of Qatar in order to try to obtain that an investigation be conducted over the treatment that was inflicted upon him. Those attempts went to no avail. He never got any answer to the numerous letters he sent or his counsel sent to try to raise the issue with local authorities. So then he sought justice and compensation through other courses of action, including by seeking here in Washington, D.C. for a case to be brought before the World Bank, before the International Convention, under the auspices of the International Convention for the Settlement of Investment Disputes. And that was the first time that we actually were able to obtain some information from Qatar under the different procedural order of the tribunal. He also sought justice and compensation by bringing a criminal complaint before the French authorities. And why I'm mentioning that, apart from giving you a broad oversight of the case, is that the response to those different actions brought by Tayeb in 2021 and 2022 was that in 2023 we discovered that Qatar had, I would say, resumed whatever they had started in 2020, and within a week they had conducted what was apparently Qatar investigation into Tayeb that really lasted a week, and then brought him to trial in absentia because he was never formally notified of the trial to come, and sentenced him to death on 31st of May 2023. That was Qatar reprisal for Tayeb's legitimate action in France and at the international level to seek justice. I think I've basically covered, at least during the amount of time that was allocated to me, the general scope of what has happened to Tayeb, but I'm of course at your disposal to give you any further insight over either the factual background or the different action we brought on behalf of Tayeb.
Thank you, Luke, for that overview. Our next speaker is Aaron Meyer. Meyer, did I say that right?
No, Meyer's good.
Meyer's good, thanks. Aaron's a New York-based attorney, consultant, and analyst with expertise in lawfare, Middle Eastern history, and international law. He's an accomplished writer and former research director for some prominent organizations. Over to you, Aaron.
Thank you. So where do we start? You've heard the specifics about the case. And I'm sure you've heard several things that are jumping out at you, right? You've got trial, in absentia, you have non-disclosure of pertinent information, the inability to mount a defense. In short, what you're hearing is a perversion of the legal system, right? Now, as a practicing attorney, I'll admit, any legal system can be manipulated. But when you read the facts of this case, and you read what Qatar did when he tried to seek redress outside of that country, where of course you're not going to find any sort of justice, what you find is that the legal system there, it's not simply being manipulated, it's set up that way. What you have is a system where anybody can be tried, can be imprisoned, and sentenced to death without any sort of what we would call due process. How does that happen? Well, there are historical precedents that could have led us to this point. A little known case in 1763 in England comes to mind. There was a dispute. The Secretary of State believed that he had the power to issue a general warrant and that he could delegate anybody in all of England to search and seize any person at any time. He actually said this. And he said that because certain other officials had used that since the Revolution, British Revolution, not ours, therefore it was custom and he had the right not only to have it, but to assign that, to delegate it. And it went up to the highest court and actually had two decisions. One was by Lord Camden and one was by Lord Mansfield. And what they basically said was, no. Very simple answer, no. They gave slightly different reasons for it, which if anybody wants, I can point you to the right direction. But the key was, even if it had become a practice, that doesn't make it legitimate. And even if the Secretary of State may have had that, that does not mean that he had the power to delegate that. What you had was a court applying the law and directly refuting what the executive branch was trying to do, right? If you had a Lord Mansfield in Qatar, I don't think this case would have been anything like what it became. But that's the problem. The Qatari legal system is predicated on a constitution that looks very pretty. I mean, if anybody else has read it, it has all the guarantees you can think of, right? I mean, everything there in black and white, it's beautiful. It's also not worth the paper it's printed on. Because what ends up happening is exactly what happens here. You're unable to present a defense to your case if you don't even know the charges against you. And that's by design. That's not manipulation of the legal system. Again, that is a legal system that is merely a cover, at best. And I'm actually trying to be nice here. I could be a lot more critical of it. That's the problem. The secondary problem that we're seeing is that Qatar feels emboldened to try to extend its reach beyond its borders, right? In international law in the 21st century, the 20th century, it's fair to say you had nations that were very concerned with preserving their sovereignty, right? In the end of World War II, that was a big issue for basically all of the major players that were still around. And so their legal systems reflect that. Their interpretation of international law and acceptance of it, again, sort of brings that into their legal systems to varying degrees. What Qatar has done here is a step beyond that. Again, extending your internal sovereignty and trying to take advantage of it and apply it far beyond your borders. That's a relatively new concept that we've seen, especially in the 21st century. Iran is also notorious for trying to do this. For, again, reprisal is the right word. For preventing people from using legal means that are guaranteed in other countries or internationally to overcome what was otherwise an improper sovereign decision. So that is the legal structure that really is behind it. I don't want to say legal because that doesn't feel right. You know, you're talking about what we would call in domestic court here, we'd call it abusive process, right? When you're using the judicial process, not for any sort of legitimate purpose, but to silence someone, but for other similar reasons. And why? Well, I think that really goes into, well, what is Qatar's problem? Qatar has a very big problem, and that problem lies in human rights. And with that, I'm going to turn it over because I think I know exactly what you're going to hear next, and I'm going to happily cede the floor.
Thank you. We'll next go to Irina Sukerman, who's a New York-based attorney specializing in human rights, national security, and founder of a boutique law practice. Irina is an expert in geopolitical analysis, information warfare, and human rights advocacy. And over to you, Irina.
Thank you so much for your attention. I'd like to follow my esteemed colleagues by broadening the context a little bit and by addressing why this case has global implications and why it matters in the United States. So I'd like to draw attention to a couple of interesting facts that I noticed browsing through the documents pertaining to this case. The first fact is that the individual whose phone was allegedly stolen by Tayyip and who was at the center of the scandal regarding FIFA corruption and the World Cup corruption and bribery was a cousin of the head of the state security in Qatar. By sheer chance, by sheer coincidence, this case took on this additional dimension because these two individuals, the organizer of the World Cup and the manager of the Paris Saint-Germain, is also a relative of the intelligence of the head of Qatari intelligence. The other issue is the scope of the case. At the heart of it was the controversy over documents and evidence that could have cost Qatar the participation in the hosting rights for World Cup. It's huge. The same during the period of time we are talking about, the United States made direct accusations of bribery in Qatar's uptake the rights. And there was also charges against this individual in question, Mr. Tayyip, for taking bribes related to broadcasting of the World Cup. Very serious charges. What's even more interesting that after the documents in question were forcibly recovered from Mr. bin Abdurrahman, he was magically acquitted in Switzerland of all these charges. Isn't that interesting? Also a coincidence. So you have this indictment, you have very serious charges by the Brooklyn DA's office, by the DOJ in the United States, and all of a sudden this individual is found to have not done anything wrong, and there's nothing and walks away from this entire matter. Not only does he walk away, but he becomes the Minister of State in Qatar. So he's actually elevated to his position, and then after Mr. Tayyip is released from custody, it's only then that the actual process that imposes a secret death penalty on him starts. Another fact that I'd like to draw attention to is the non-intervention of the French government and assorted authorities that were contacted during the process of this case. Now, Mr. Tayyip is no ordinary businessman. He has political contacts at the top level, including the French President Emmanuel Macron, and that is referenced throughout the entire case. So what does it say? It means that there is a political dimension to this case going beyond simple judicial violations that can happen in any country. We are talking about the fact that Qatar which had sent a letter to the French government concerning this matter, was essentially blackmailing and extorting the French government and several other countries in the process of this case, and it uses the leverage that it has to blackmail entire governments into ignoring human rights violations against their citizens. The third matter is what Mr. Maya referred to earlier, the extension of national sovereignty violations beyond Qatar's borders. Because not only did they torture and isolate and forge documents, as has been proven by several diverse international authorities, but they conducted operations in several different countries in support of this case, and yet they failed to present an iota of evidence showing Mr. Tayyip's connection to the allegations of espionage that they claimed against him. All of this is serious enough and bad enough and has global implications for Qatar's undue influence over the international community and international justice systems. But it would have been Sustainable had it been an isolated matter, one case that shows an abuse of power, a few officials gone rogue. Unfortunately, that is not the case. First of all, this case was authorized by the emir himself. So it goes all the way to the top, and we know that the head of state of Qatar is fully aware of all these details and authorized these violations and all the extortions that follow. Second, Qatar has a pattern of bad behavior that shows that this is systematic abuse. And I'll refer to a few cases, some of which I was personally exposed to. One of those cases is the case of Mark Bennett, a dual British-French national who worked for Qatar, just like Mr. Tayyip. He was not a dissident, he was not a critic, he was an insider who was charged with creating a company, with building up a company called Discover Qatar in preparation for the World Cup as well. And when Mr. Bennett decided to defect to a rival Saudi company in the middle of what was essentially a Gulf crisis and a standoff between these two countries, Qatar took it personal. Qatar took it as a betrayal, and not just someone deciding to switch to a better paid position, but as a political move. And with the assistance of the then head of Qatar Airways, they took Bennett into custody. They subjected him to harsh measures and torture and arbitrary detention for 3 weeks, forcing him to release a laptop and documents that he had in his possession that they claimed were confidential and that they were claiming was subject of espionage to Saudi Arabia. At the end of his on the bag, because he was preparing for a Christmas party that night, it looked like he was just reading a book and that somebody knocked on the door. He had talked to her earlier on the phone and did not sound suicidal. He sounded like somebody ready to go home. So this case involved a massive cover-up. I had an opportunity to talk to the personal representative of the family, and actually the case is far worse than what was reported in the media at the time, because it also involved the cover-up of an autopsy of Mr. Bennett's body. It involved pressure over British officials and diplomats, and extensive interference with the London inquest into their own autopsy at the time. So we see someone who was literally very likely murdered in a massive cover-up, again, over the case of documents pertaining to a massive World Cup. Another case, very similar, not quite as Mr. Fawaz Alatia, who was born in London, but who essentially sued the former Prime Minister of Qatar, Mr. Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani. He had started a case inside Qatar trying to recover ancestral lands that were unjustly confiscated, and for his trouble, he was taken into detention for 15 months, kept in solitary confinement, and went through very much a pattern of violations similar to Mr. Tayyip. His efforts to sue the former Prime Minister, who since then had retired, went to naught. Qatar and its former officials were found to have diplomatic immunity by choice of the UK judiciary, and the Foreign Office deferred to the judiciary to make that decision. This is not a red line, this was a political decision made by the judiciary. They decided to assign immunity in this case. Third case is the use of the death penalty for political purposes, and this is clearly an entire political case. This is the case of Indian nationals, naval officers who were detained in Qatar, accused of espionage in favor of a third country, and assigned death penalty with essentially no legal representation or access to their diplomatic counsel. Eventually the case was set through political means, through intervention by the Indian government at the top level, but not after Qatar allegedly issued a set of demands political demands from the Indian government. Finally, a fourth matter illustrating the danger that Mr. Tayyip remains at is a human rights case that took place, that was aired during the course of the World Cup and yet failed to make any noise whatsoever. There were leaked documents from the Home Office in London, once again, showing that a transgender child of one of the senior sheikhs in Qatar escaped to the United Kingdom and received asylum due to threats to this individual's life. I had an opportunity to personally assess those documents and interview relevant witnesses in this case. And without going into details, I can tell you that the level of interference in foreign matters and violations of national sovereignty by Qatar goes far beyond what most people are aware of. There are no measures that haven't been taken, from forgery of documents to intimidation of witnesses to abduction of Qatari nationals from foreign soil, even those granted asylum. So, to summarize, Mr. Tayyip's life is indeed in danger. If Qatar issued the death penalty, if it is willing to intimidate entire governments to keep silence on this case, if it's playing political games at this level, there are no measures that it cannot use to advance its agenda. If these violations of national sovereignties continue to be met with impunity, it's only a matter of time before American citizens can face similar matters. We have already seen cases of critics of Qatar who had nothing to do with politics or with espionage being hacked and the information being leaked in the midst of the Gulf crisis. That can happen again. It happens all the time. And it's only a matter of time before Qatar can start intimidating American witnesses, going after American critics, assigning death penalty to them, and possibly even abducting and imprisoning them. There are multiple cases of malfeasance, and there are other cases of Qatar directly interfering in the American legal system. Just to give you one final example, the Emir's brother, younger brother Khalid, was infamous for his brutality, abuse of employees, and violation of labor laws. And he was eventually sued by a former American employee over labor law violations after this individual witnessed brutality towards others. People were literally murdered and disappeared. Other people were shot, beaten, or intimidated, harassed, and threatened with death. During the course of the lawsuit in U.S. courts, several Qatari linked individuals with links to the Qatari intelligence interfered in the process by various means. They've attempted to divert the legal system through abuses, systematic abuses, by filing and leaking documents. They disrupted the case, and if they are able to do that over something like that, over a private lawsuit, imagine what else they can do.
Thank you very much. All right, we have Andy Vermont, who's sent a video message. So if I can direct your attention to the monitor on this side. So very quickly, Andy is a journalist within Gazette and president of the World Council for Public Diplomacy and Community Dialogue. He's an advocate for fundamental rights and an EU Climate Pact ambassador.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andy Vermont. I'm a human rights defender with the World Council for Public Diplomacy and Community Dialogue. And today we are called to something greater than ourselves. We're here to stand up, to speak out and to defend the very core of justice. Because what we are witnessing, the accusation that Qatar has leveled against Tayyip bin Abderrahman, is nothing short of a farce. It's an outrage. It's an offense to every value we hold dear. And I'll say it clearly, justice demands fairness. Now let's look at what Qatar wants us to believe. They're telling us that Tayyip tried to sell a phone. A single phone from Paris Saint-Germain to the United Arab Emirates. They are asking us to imagine that the Emirates, a nation built on the principle of law and accountability, would throw everything away for a single fool. Friends, I don't know about you, but to me, this is just not possible. It's absurd, it's insulting, and it's beneath the standards of justice. Because justice demands fairness. And let's talk about that so-called confession. It wasn't freely given. It was forced, raced out under intense pressure, signed out of fear. This is not justice. It's cruelty. Qatar signed the UN Convention Against Torture, a promise to honor the dignity of all people. And yet here we are, faced with a blatant violation of that promise. They choose cruelty over compassion, force over fairness, and they think we'll just accept that, but we won't. Justice demands fairness. And friends, this story is not just about Tayyip. It's about every single person who has faced down injustice, who's been silenced by fear, who suffered because someone else held the power. It's about a regime trying to cover up its own faults with the web of lies. This is not simply an accusation. It's a betrayal of justice, and we will not stand for it, because justice demands fairness. So let us remember why we are here today. We're here to hold the line. We're here to stand up for what is right. We're here to stand up for what is true. And we are here to stand up for what is fair. We are here to remind the world that dignity is not up for sale, that justice is not a game, and that fairness is not just a word. It's a principle. And in the end, we know this: justice demands fairness.
Right. So I think we've had a good overview of the background into Zayed's case, the historical precedents, and the issues with the Qatari legal system that have enabled abuses in this case, and the global implications of this case as well. So now we'd like to open up the floor for questions, either to Tayyip or to our panelists who are present today. Dave will be around with a microphone. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand.
Thank you so much. My name is Sayyid Al-Muthanna. I'm from Yemen. And I know very well what the Emirat or UAE did in Yemen. So my question is, how can we trust you as a society if you are receiving funds to only attack Qatar and make both UAE and Saudi Arabia look great? So are you generous or branding agent for their image? And the second question, did you know that Tayyip convicted in criminal in France?
The questions to me?
Yes.
I'll start with the second question. Actually, it doesn't matter whether Mr. Tayyip is a convicted criminal or not. That does not justify violating his laws, violating his rights in Qatar. And that's what the case is about. It's not about who he is as a person. It's about his legal rights and the responsibility for Qatar to behave justly towards the accused. As for the second question, I'm not sure what relevance the situation in Yemen has to this specific judiciary issue. But if you want to organize an event related to Yemen and Yemen rights, I'll be happy to talk about it. I've talked about Yemen, and I've talked about human rights in Yemen in Geneva, and I have a record on that issue.
Yes, and I may add something regarding the second question. Tayyab is not convicted in France. Tayyab has never been convicted elsewhere than in Qatar. Tayyab is considered to be a person of interest in a vast investigation presently conducted by French authority regarding the hidden activities of Mr. Nasser El-Khalafi and the PSG. This vast investigation has been going on for now quite a while, and it involves dozens of persons along the lines that the PSG had set up a covert operation, let me put it this way, in order to investigate and eventually retaliate against persons whose activity would be considered as adverse to the interest of Qatar and the interest of the PSG, so the Paris soccer club that Qatar owns. In that investigation, where again dozens of persons have been considered as persons of interest, Tayyab, who were linked to the PSG, who were linked to some of PSG top officials before he moved to Qatar, is considered as a person of interest. He has not been convicted.
I'm just going to add, let's also not forget that just because a Qatari court found him guilty, that doesn't mean any other country has to recognize that. Comedy is premised on the notion that whatever legal proceedings occurred are, at least to some appreciable degree, compliant with the laws of another country. The United States, for example, would take one look at a trial without evidence, without disclosing even the charges, and it would be thrown out. So the Qatari judgment really doesn't apply anywhere else, and as you've already
to Tayyab's life, because the fact that it was rendered, in absentia, without any notification, meant that for some time there was a death sentence over, Qatar, over Tayyab, of which he was not aware of, and he could have, easily been traveling to a country which does not have the same level of respect for, due process of law, and be arrested and be extradited to Qatar, because for a long time he didn't knew that there was a death penalty pending against him, and the only reason he knew, and that's something that to go, to move along what has been said before, the only way he knew about this death penalty was not through the assistance of the French government, who knew about it but did not act upon it and did not inform him. It was through actually the action of the press media, who revealed the condemnation when they heard about it through their own sources.
Do we have other questions for either our panelists or for Tayyab, who's online and available to answer? Gentlemen.
I just want to say thank you for bringing awareness to this critical issue. This question is for you. What options exist currently within the judicial system or within Qatar, or perhaps outside of it, in order to address this injustice? And are you taking any specific options or actions currently or planned in the future?
Thank you very much for your question. We are definitely acting to try to get some redress for Tayyab right now. We are looking to we are pursuing several venues. As I've said, we've filed a criminal complaint in France. After the criminal complaint we filed in Qatar did not go any further than acknowledging our complaint. So we filed a criminal complaint in France. In France you can file a criminal complaint without naming the person the perpetrators. It's called complaint against X. So we filed these criminal complaints for the accusation of torture, kidnapping, arbitrary detention, as well as other minor offenses. And this investigation is ongoing. It led to several action by a French judge, including raiding, sorry for the term, it may not be the appropriate one, but still raiding the offices of the president of the PSG, and most probably Tayyip's death sentencing a couple of months later was just retaliating for this action, which has raised a lot of press coverage at the time it was done. So that's one of the venues we're looking for. We also brought, because it was actually the only way we could bring Qatar to a judicial action, despite its sovereign immunities. We also brought an investor case before under the auspices of the International Convention for the Settlement of Investment Disputes here in Washington, D.C. And this case is also ongoing. I think what is interesting regarding this case, and all the documents available are public right now, what is interesting is that Qatar has tried very hard to get the case rejected on admissibility grounds, claiming that Tayyip was not an investor, claiming that we should not have access to some of the documents. And up to now, the tribunal has rejected all those claims. So obviously, even if the case is ongoing, and I won't give you the final decision, which will only come when the merits is brought sometimes in January 2026, but at least the tribunal, which is composed of impartial arbitrator, has decided that they want to hear Qatar's position on our allegation of malpractice, arrest, inequitable and unfair treatment. And I think that's very important.
What does it say about, this here in the United States, Biden administration classified Qatar as a non-NATO ally, and for the United States to be very closely cozying up with Qatar, considering its what does that say about power that Qatar's money buys in terms of mitigating human rights violations?
I'll take a step at that one. Well, the relationship with Qatar has been growing through bipartisan administrations, and it's been a bipartisan failure. I think right now we have an opportunity to review that relationship in light of the evidence of the type of forgeries that shows we simply cannot trust Qatar to be our counterterrorism ally, our trade ally, our defense ally. If they can forge signatures in a human rights case, imagine what kind of evidence they can forge regarding funding of terrorism. And I hope the Trump administration will reconsider its business relations and its Qatar's role as an investor in the U.S. and our defense cooperation as well. I think this is a great time to review that. As far as closing up corruption begets corruption. Qatar is a major exporter of corruption, and we are seeing that it turns everything it touches into fruit of the poisonous tree. And for that reason, I think it shouldn't just be U.S., but the entire international community asking what price they're willing to pay for Qatari investments.
If you don't mind, to sort of jump on that, nations, what's the first rule of international affairs, right? Nations operate in their own perceived best interests. At the end of the day, cynical as it sounds, that's what it is. The problem is, it's the perceived part. Now, it's convenient, right? It's been convenient for the United States to accept Qatari money and act as if there's this grand alliance, when in fact, there's a financial arrangement, right? I would say that's about as nicely as we could put it. The question now becomes, are we going to actually look at the other factors, right? Human trafficking is a massive problem around the world, okay? We're seeing it here in the United States. We're seeing a bipartisan approach to it finally because it's affecting us right here. Qatar hasn't actually done anything significant. I know there have been reports that say they've reformed, and I'm sure there have been attempts, but it's still a massive issue there. Is that going to be the tipping point? At what point does the financial ramification mean less than the actual human toll in the larger picture? You know, when that presupposes that there's a larger strategy on our part. That's going to be the first thing that we need. We need a strategy that actually goes beyond, well, we can get a trade surplus of X amount of billions of dollars and we'll go from there. We need to get past that first.
If I may close on this subject, I mean, it's very hard for a French and European citizen not to speak about Qatar if you don't speak about corruption. I mean, we do live in a region where, you know, a member of the European Parliament was found with bags of money coming from Qatar. I mean, literally bags of money. I don't know if you imagine. I've never seen someone with a bag of money. The Vice President of the European Parliament had bags of money coming from Qatar. So, but in Tayyip's case, I think, you know, you can always picture that member of Parliament with her bags of money, or that member of the French Parliament acting, I mean, claiming that Qatar is a champion of human rights. But it does have, you know, some very concrete consequences. Have factual evidence that the French ambassador to Qatar in March 2020 instituting, and we never got any answer from the French ministry. So all our requests for assistance or requests for diplomatic protection went unanswered by the French ministry. And finally, we have this very dire example of the silence kept by the same French ministry when she was personally informed that Tayyip was under investigation in April 2023 and did not inform Tayyip, despite, you know, the fact that she was well aware of his situation. And likewise, in July 2023, she got personal information that a French citizen had been sentenced to death by a foreign power. Yet she didn't act. She didn't inform Tayyip, despite, you know, whatever danger that this death sentence could represent for him. So I think that, you know, this corruption that we all see as, you know, big movement of money, etc., has very concrete adverse consequences on the way our own administration functions, at least in France, but presumably also at the European Union. I have no expertise in the US administration, but there are adverse consequences. And I think if something can, you know, at least if one consequence of Tayyip's action was to have a more global reflection about what we expect from our own administration when it comes to defending citizens against foreign powers.
Does anyone in the audience have a question for Tayyip, who's online via Zoom? Well, I do. Tayyip, thank you so much for your courage in telling your story, and I'm very sorry to learn the extent of what you have gone through. But how has this impacted your family? Would you like to talk about that? Share with us?
And we speak in French. For the translator, it's okay?
You can go.
Merci pour votre question. Donc, je tiens ici à remercier encore mon épouse, donc Mahjouba Ben Keltoum, qui sans elle, je ne serais pas là en train de vous parler. Car elle a été impliquée malgré elle dans toutes ces souffrances et dans toute cette séquestration, parce qu'il s'agit d'une séquestration. Donc elle également a été torturée psychologiquement, puisque les services secrets...
Est-ce, monsieur Taïb, si je me permets de vous poser un peu, he said thank you all, thank you for listening to me today, and he wants to thank his wife, Mrs. Mahjoub, for all the effort, despite all the things that he has been through, and this case of a tragedy and oppression that have been all over these past years.
Mon épouse a été torturée psychologiquement puisque les services secrets l'ont obligée à se rendre en Algérie pour récupérer toutes mes archives personnelles et professionnelles en janvier 2020.
So his wife has been, my wife has been tortured physically and mentally. She has been forced to go to Algeria to get by personal stuff and by the secret services of Qatar.
En laissant ma fille de 15 ans chez l'adjoint du docteur Ali El-Mali, en obligeant à garder ma fille au Qatar.
She has left his 15 years old daughter with Dr. Ali in Qatar.
Donc, mon épouse a ensuite pu retourner bien en France pour essayer d'obtenir ma libération, et on lui a demandé également les mêmes services de remettre les différents supports et documents restés en France, d'abord à l'ambassade du Qatar et ensuite chez les avocats du Qatar.
My wife has finally came to France, and she had been also forced to get the documents from Qatar and from French. Yes. Si je veux clarifier quelque chose avec vous, Monsieur Taïb, vous voulez dire en secret.
Donc on a fait participer ma famille, malgré elle, dans une affaire qui est une affaire extrajudiciaire. Et en fait, une affaire d'un État voyou qui n'hésite pas à impliquer des gens innocents, votre femme, votre fille, votre fils, pour mettre de la pression et pour essayer de vous faire céder sur tous les plans, en plus de la torture physique et psychologique.
Yeah, the case involved all my family, including my son, daughter, and my wife. They have been all included in this tragic case, and
Et donc, ma famille, comme je vous ai dit, est très affectée aujourd'hui, mais on continue le combat, car c'est au-delà de notre statut de victime, il faut que les choses changent. On veut que la communauté internationale, en l'occurrence les États-Unis aujourd'hui, puisse... Vous m'entendez?
Yes, je peux vous entendre.
Pardon. Donc on veut que la communauté internationale et les États-Unis en premier lieu, qui sont un allié stratégique et politique du Qatar, parce que vous savez, à quelques centaines de mètres de la base militaire qui représente 10 000 soldats américains, je me faisais torturer. Donc il y a une réflexion à mener, savoir que des soldats positionnés à quelques centaines de mètres ont été peut-être des témoins privilégiés de ce qui se passait au Qatar. Donc, au-delà de...
Slow down. طيب.
So we will fight back. Me and my family have been tortured, and my family is affected, so they can put some pressure on me. This scam government of Qatar, and I have been tortured a few meters away from a special force, like the embassy. He has been tortured and physically by some soldiers. Vous pouvez continuer.
Donc je demande aux Américains de réfléchir à la compatibilité entre leurs valeurs, liberté, justice et droits humains et les pratiques de torture et de répression dans un pays qu'ils protègent militairement et soutiennent politiquement.
So I'm kindly asking the US and the international community that are fighting for freedom and judicial department and justice to help me in my case and to defend what they believe in.
Je tiens encore à remercier tous les panélistes et également donc, toutes les personnes qui nous soutiennent et entendent ce témoignage d'une famille qui reste très affectée.
So I would like to take a moment to thank everybody who has listened to me and who has been involved in my case, and I would thank you, all of you, for this chance that it has been given to me.
Merci beaucoup, Tayyab, and once again, thank you for sharing your story. Do you have any final closing parting thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, you know, maybe just a general concluding remark. So, I've been a lawyer for 20 years, but I think I've never encountered a case that is, you know, so global in the sense that it touches so many levels of so many fields of you know the legal practice that I have. But my feeling is that this case is this case because Tayyab has shown, after he was expelled, has shown a resilience to the aggression that he suffered from Qatar, that he's continuing to suffer from Qatar. A resilience that you barely never meet in someone. It's very exceptional, but it also it should also show that there are, as was said before, there are probably lots of other cases of similar unlawful and inhuman treatment perpetrated by Qatar. Despite whatever their legal system may say, they still arrest and detain people without due process of law. They still torture people without due process of law. They still violate the consular protection that any foreigners must be granted when arrested by a foreign power. So I think that it's important to seize Tayyab case as one example of what is presently happening in Qatar and what could happen to any person, any foreign investor or foreign businessman that for some, for whatever reason, because actually the real reason was never formally explained, but for whatever reason comes within, I would say, the bad, the bad feeling from a Qatari official. And I think it's very important that Tayyab case, for Tayyab case to be shown as an example that we need to address collectively as lawyers, but also as citizens of foreign countries that do need to protect their fundamental rights even abroad.
I think you said example. I was thinking, is this the tipping point? We know there have been other cases, right? But is this the one that's egregious, that will shock people's conscience? That you have somebody who actually went over there to work for their Human Rights Commission, right? That's a part that we have to remember. This is not just somebody who's going over there to work in industry or to facilitate business arrangements, which, by the way, that's the one area where Qatari law really has developed, is commercial transactions. That they're very good about now. But you have somebody who actually went out to do something about their human rights crisis, and that's who they turn around and target. That's who they're going after. And why? Well, we have our suspicions. Certainly, the FIFA scandal that they've been trying to cover up is a big part of it, and a lot of other corruption as well. Is this the tipping point? Is this the point where everybody can be shocked to the point where we're going to speak out about it and get the United States and get other countries to do it? France's reaction thus far has been less than one would hope. We can only hope that other countries will do a bit more.
has never been held accountable for the types of violations that other countries have been slapped down and very hard. U.S. has levied sanctions against some of its closest allies, in the Middle East included, but never against Qatar. Until U.S. and others stop treating Qatar as exempt from accountability, as a unique case that is somehow immune, nothing is going to change. The officials tied to torture should be sanctioned. The head of the state security apparatus that is allowing the falsification of documents, that is allowing the use of unaccepted methods, should not be allowed into the United States. He should not be cooperating with the United States on anything. You cannot trust a person who is involved in violations to be an ally. You cannot trust him on any issue. Yes, the emir has sovereign immunity, you can sue him, but there are many other ways in which you can pressure Qatar. For instance, by shutting down Al Jazeera, which also played a nefarious role in this case, and it has promoted global terrorism. It not only should be sanctioned and labeled as under FARA, which it most certainly is. It's actually funded by the state of Qatar, by the emir personally, but it is actually acting as a political apparatus, engaging in abuses, promoting human rights abuses. There is no value that it provides to the international community, and certainly not to the U.S. There are lawsuits that should be allowed to proceed against Qatari entities and individuals, their assets that can be frozen and can be seized. When Qataris are no longer welcome in the United States, when their money is no longer welcome, when you cannot pay people because no one wants to take their money, then things will start to change. It can be a very clear signal. When we start reviewing our special relations with them, when we start revoking the non-NATO ally status over their violations, things will start to change. Qatar is a very small country. Unless bigger countries like the US, like European Union, like the Middle Eastern countries, give it the cover of legitimacy, it has no legitimacy. It has a population, and a local population of about 300,000 people. The rest are foreign workers with very limited rights. They do not have voting power, they have no power, they have no voice. So it's stop giving Qatar more power than it has or needs to have, and and there are plenty of money to be made elsewhere.
I'd like to thank all our panelists today for this very thought-provoking discussion. I don't think I can add any more to summarize, but I just want to say that injustice anywhere is a threat to human rights everywhere, so we should all keep that in mind. So thank you, Luke, Aaron, Irina, Tayyip, thank you, and Andy Vermont, who joined us via video message. But I'd also like to express my thanks and gratitude to the Capital Institute and Ding and Maria for putting this together, so we can have a round of applause for these two lovely ladies and my panelists. And thank you all for joining us today.